Vitya Diaries Chapter 3, Out with the Old. I normally spent New Year's Eve with my aunt and uncle, kicking off the first of the winter holidays. We never went out, but there was always a lot of food and, often enough, my cousins would come with their kids. It always got loud, no matter how many people were over, and it always went until way too late. So when Coach said that there was a party being held in honor of our win at the Grand Prix, I was all over it. Coach picked me up from the academy, ready to go with suitcase in hand. I still had to spend the holiday with my relatives. That wasn't optional. Dressed in the nicest dress, slacks, blazer, and turtleneck I owned. It wasn't exactly a suit and tie, but that would have been almost as bad as wearing a dress all evening. No thanks. You look lovely, Coach said, taking my suitcase with one hand and holding the door for me with the other. I gave him my biggest smile and hopped into the car, remembering only when my medal thumped against my hip that I'd stowed it away to take it along. I'd need to be more careful if I didn't want to ruin the surprise. Too much bouncing and it'd clank against the car door. I settled more carefully, and put on my seatbelt. Thank you, Coach. He closed the door for me, and put my suitcase in the trunk. The drive to the hotel wasn't long, but fraught with danger as all of Russia came out to celebrate the evening in the streets of St. Petersburg. Somehow, we made it to the hotel in one piece, and Coach led me to where I could put my coat. It was a much fancier place than we ever stayed in, the kind just meant for parties and movies. Probably one of Sasha's oldest sponsors was hosting, and they had the money for that sort of thing. Now, Vitya, Coach put a hand on my shoulder as he walked me down the hallway and toward the grand ballroom. At least, that's what the engraved map on the wall indicated. I need you to be on your best behavior, socialize, get to know everyone. This is an opportunity to get a sponsor of your own for the coming season and years to come. It could change things for you as a gold medalist. Coach Feltzman. Oh, this must be Vitya. Mr. Nikiforov. A pleasure. We hadn't even made it into the ballroom before we were attacked, and in seconds, the vultures had picked our bones clean. Coach did his best to field most of the harder questions, but I had no idea what most of them were even talking about. I could, at least, shake their hands and talk about ballet and skating. Any remembering that I was supposed to do, though, went right over my head. There was praise, there were questions, and there were all sorts of names, and in the end, there was a lot of talk about Sasha. Sasha who, when I managed to get a glance of, had a crowd of suits and floor-length gowns hanging on his every word at one corner of the room. He made it look so easy, scattering sparse information like little breadcrumbs to eager pigeons. They ate it right out of his hand, and he didn't even look happy about it, just mildly amused. Meanwhile, I was drowning, and that had my attention wandering away like little stray lambs on the hillside, prey to the money wolves that surrounded me, the little shepherd with no idea who to pursue and who to abandon. Vitya, go find some food. Mingle. I abandoned the field and looked up at Coach, who smiled back at me in sympathy. He'd always been good at reading me when I was getting anxious, and now was no exception. Okay, Coach. I wasn't going to wait for him to ask twice, or chance being caught by another group of Coach's important friends for more catching up. I escaped with one quick nod, turning tail and slipping through the crowd without any further delay. Maybe I wasn't so good at money talk, but I was fast, and that was always useful. Food and mingling. Neither of them sounded good. There were way too many people around, and though I had my doubts that any of them were watching too closely, I still felt too exposed. I browsed the banquet tables for due diligence and, finding that my stomach was still twisted in knots, picked up a delicate flute of pink champagne from the edge of the table in lieu of anything else. Satisfied with such a pretty thing to keep my hands busy, I moved to the outskirts and began a long sweep around the ballroom to observe, wandering around columns with my daydreams close at hand. Had this been any other time or place, a handsome prince might have pursued my hand for a dance on the polished wood floor. Your hand, my princess? I'd have to be coy, letting my gaze move over him so subtly with only the hint of a smile before offering my hand. Of course, we'd step out to the center of the floor, with all of the business people moving aside to make room, and someone would take the champagne from me, letting me move into the perfect starting pose for the waltz while the orchestra began. Then, we'd take our first steps into an incredible dance, capturing the attention of all present. Oh, but Vitya is a dancer, 2. We should have known with how well he skates. So elegant, amazing, just like a princess. Yes, just like that. Not that I'd pay any mind to the admiration of the crowd, so lost in the eyes of my prince, leading me through the steps even though I knew them even better than he did, and he'd know that, too, but smile so sweetly, because whoever leads gets to steal the first kiss. Vitya. There you are. I fell out of the fantasy and into cold, harsh reality in the form of my ex-roommate. I'd recognize his voice and condescending tone anywhere in an instant. The knots from earlier twisted, every fiber tight to the point of snapping, but I turned to face him, anyway. Gavrik, what are you doing here? He shrugged, smirked, and leaned against the column with his own little glass of champagne, which he took a quick sip from before explaining. Unlike me, he did wear a suit and tie, and he looked very nice in it. Mature, hair slicked back, posture relaxed, but he belonged with these people. They were his type of crowd. My parents came to visit from Moscow for the holidays, and since we saw your win at the Grand Prix final, we put feelers out, found out about the benefit, and got yourself invited? Of course he would just invite himself to the one fancy party that I'd get to go to. That was just like him, that arrogant, selfish jerk. Well, it wasn't as if it was hard. This is a part for sponsors, and my parents. I cutted him off. Why? He blinked at me, smile faltering, but only for a second. It was almost impossible to get him to catch him in a faux pas. I thought it was obvious. Vitya. Why else would we come? I don't know, Gavrik, I said, using my best impersonation of a cold Sasha-style glare. To tell me I'm stupid? He frowned. Vitya, if this is about my changing roommates, I laughed. I wanted him to admit it, the reason why he left. All the times he accused me of being, well, and I wasn't. I'm not. But he left anyway. It was complicated, Vitya. No, it wasn't. I could have broken the stem of the champagne flute, gotten blood and glass everywhere. I could have thrown the champagne in his face. Or the whole thing, for that matter. Maybe I should have. Instead, I shifted my gaze to the Gavrik's ear. I couldn't stand his eyes. I'd cared too much about the way they'd light up when I could surprise him, rare an occasion though it was, and it hurt. How he left without even saying goodbye while I was getting my first medal. I huffed. You and I know exactly why you left, so don't try to pretend that you're my friend now. Gavrik said nothing, just watched me, studying my face like he had so many times before, and I'd studied him enough times to know that he was worried. Good. I rolled onto the balls of my feet and straightened my back, chin up, chest out, eyes narrowed. He was still taller, but that didn't matter. I could posture if I wanted to, and I was done with him. I'm a Grand Prix champion, Gavrik. I've got gold under my belt. And I don't have time for you. When the words were out, I turned heel and stalked away without looking back. There would be no show of weakness from me. None that Gav could see, anyway. I looked for Coach, but he was busy entertaining people still, seated at a table with several others drinking what was probably vodka. Of course, there were a few others from the team, too, but they were also successfully mingling or eating. Everyone was doing the party thing and having a grand old time, except me and my little glass of champagne, and hopefully Gavrik. But I didn't want to think about him anymore. I milled through the adults, small and unimportant despite the gold in my pocket, all too aware of the hours left before Coach would take me home. Just one exhausting event after another. Could I avoid Gavrik or the industrial brokers that had son-in-laws that worked in? Where was it, again? I couldn't remember. I didn't want to. I just wanted to go to bed. But it was then, in my moment of deepest, darkest despair that I saw him. He was perched in a chair at an otherwise empty table with a book several inches thick, bent over as if he were actually eating the words within. The boy, cute and 17 or so, probably came from money given his suit, but he didn't wear it the way Gavrik did. His tie was loose, suit jacket unbuttoned, chestnut hair long enough to hang in his face, furled over one of his eyes. The other was pale blue, or maybe green, hazel, and he was frowning the way someone did when they were deep in thought. This boy had no time for networking or social climbing. That book was way more important. Obviously, amazing. How did he get here? Who was he? Why was he here in the first place? Were his parents sponsors? Guests? Maybe he was a skater, too. No, he didn't quite have the frame for it. Maybe. I had to know. After a quick check of my hair, I took a sip of champagne and approached with as much charm and grace as I possessed, smile soft and warm. He noticed only when I reached the table, suspicious brow rising, but I countered with a gracious nod and an even sweeter turn of my lips. Hi. It caught him off guard. Hello? I'm Viktor Nikiforov, I said, though I was certain that there was no need for introductions. It was only polite, though, and gave him the opportunity to introduce himself, too. And I so desperately wanted his name. Victor, he said, still frowning. Are you? Maybe he didn't know. It could have been Sasha that he was familiar with. Disappointing, but understandable. My lips thinned. The figure skater, yeah. I won gold in the Junior Grand Prix. 2 gold medals for Russia this year. I lifted my champagne in salute. Skating, he repeated, setting the book down, still confused. Yeah, the benefit was for skating. Yet somehow, the mysterious bookworm had missed the memo. He must have been dragged by his parents. I had to sympathize. It was just the sort of thing my aunt and uncle would have done. Even though it lost any sort of clout I had with him, it at least established a ready-made kinship. Are you trans? Was I? It wasn't the first time I'd been asked, but definitely the first time it had been so blunt and soon in polite conversation. I stared, immediate heat making my cheeks match the champagne in my hands. I shook my head, forcing my smile back into its place. No, I'm. There was no easy way to explain it, and no way I was going to try to with a more or less perfect stranger, so I went with the most succinct answer there was. I'm just Victor. Oh, he didn't get it, but it didn't seem to matter, cause he held out his hand after Nikodim Yermolai. Thank God. Not only had he dropped the subject, but he'd given me his name. I took his hand, just his fingers at first, and brushed his fingertips between mine while watching his face until he blushed, then gave him a full and proper handshake. His hand was warm and soft, not calloused in any way. Well, except that he could have used some moisturizer, maybe. A regular boy. Cute boy. I'll call you Nico. Nico. I let go of his hand and turned to the book, pulling up a chair right next to him. I didn't have to explain my nickname, just like I didn't have to explain the mystery that was Viktor Nikiforov. The Wheel of Time? He explained that it was a fantasy book imported from the United States, because there was only one book from the series translated in Russian so far, epic fantasy, and he was reading it in English. Cute. I asked questions about the story, and he tried his best to explain the plot, the hundreds of subplots, all 50,000 characters, how all of the books fit together, and why it was the best book series of all time, but I wasn't really sure what he was talking about most of the time. It wasn't that I wasn't paying attention, I was definitely watching his mouth as he talked, but somehow, the more he talked, the more comfortable I got, and the less I was able to keep track of all of the details. Little by little, my champagne disappeared. At one point, he got up and brought us back food, and I even picked at it a little, but by and by, Nico, the boy, who was 17, lived in Moscow, went to high school, told me about how he liked to read, was taking a class in photography, and was looking forward to college. He didn't know what he would do after that. His parents had ideas for him, but he hoped he could figure it out on his own. I hope Gavrok saw us talking. I hope it bothered him. You're so cute, Nico, I might have said at some point, half against him, half against the table. I was so tired. It was too late for someone who got up as early as I did to be up even on New Year's Eve, which is probably how I'd lost track of time and drifted off, too. Not like I could help it. Nico was warm. Nico was comfortable. Best of all, Nico was quiet. There was no talk about money or pedigree. In fact, he didn't ask me hardly anything at all. It didn't matter to him that I'd won gold, or if Sasha was my rival. He didn't even seem to know who Sasha was, except that he was a skater. He didn't care. I was just a regular boy to him sort of, and there were no pretenses whatsoever. It was wonderful. I woke to the screams and shouts of excitement at midnight, startled and confused. What's happening? Midnight. You missed the presidential address. They're doing herring now. I slumped back in my seat and rubbed my eyes. My aunt and uncle were probably in the yard at that very moment to watch the fireworks, just waiting for their little nephew to come home so they, too, could break into the herring, even though it was way too late to be eating anything. Outside, the giant windows of the ballroom came alive with the vibrant colors of the fireworks that burst overhead. St. Petersburg always went all out downtown. There was never an end to it. New Year, new possibilities. Further frost on his way. Don't fall asleep again, Vitya. Nico touched my shoulder, nudging me. Is Vitya what I should call you? I turned my sleepy gaze on him, cheek coming to rest on his hand, and gave a lazy smile. Unless you can come up with something better, I said, then yawned, and only barely remembered to cover my mouth. It was so hard to be flirty when tired. Nico recaptured his hand with a little effort, face red all over again. Maybe I should call you Miska. You're like a little bear, so sleepy. I can't help it. It's late, and it's so dark in the winter. You should be hibernating, then. I laughed, but had to stop to yawn again. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds really nice. Maybe wake up for competitions. And for herring? I blinked at him. The herring. Sure. That, too. Hey, Nico. Can I get your number? Huh? Maybe it was too bold, too forward. But if it was, at least Nico would be going back to Moscow and I'd never have to see him again. The embarrassment wouldn't matter. On the other hand, if he did give me his number to text. You have a cell phone, right? Oh, I guess I left it in the hotel, though. That's okay, I pressed, smile as gentle as I could make it as I got my mobile out to add him to the contact list. I just need your number. He gave it, then confirmed it when I showed him my phone. I then wrote my name and number on a napkin, adding Miska in quotes that looked a little bit like hearts that I slid over to him, which he folded and put into his pocket. The blush looked good on him. He was fun to fluster. Coach came to collect me not long after, and Nico walked us both out to the car. It couldn't have been more perfect or romantic. No kiss, but we'd only just met, and I needed Coach to approve of him first. Anyway, he teased me about it in the car, and I loved every second of it. The cute boy I'd met at the fancy benefit called me Miska, and we'd exchanged numbers. I'd made him laugh a few times and blush, too. He'd talked to me when he had sequestered himself away from everyone else at the party. I was special, and not because I was a gold medal champion, but because I was me. By the way, you impressed a sponsor and you didn't even have to talk to them. Wait, what? Oh, no. The whole point of the benefit was to get sponsors, not boyfriends. I fell asleep. I'm sorry, Coach. We'll talk more tomorrow. Okay. Coach always spent New Year's with Lilia, and that night would be no different once he dropped me off. If he wasn't worried about the sponsors, then I probably didn't need to be there. At least, not yet. I had to get through dealing with my family first. Holidays were never as fun as they sounded like they were going to be. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, the car was stopped and Coach was waking me up, saying he was going to get my suitcase. It was time to submit to extended familial torture. I unbuckled my seatbelt and moved to get out and into the cold, then paused. Oh, the medal. Oh wait, right. Coach, I almost forgot. I dug it out of my coat, wrapped up in a handkerchief, and held it out to him. Here, for you. He took it, bewildered, and untucked the pale blue cloth until the glint of gold shone at him. This is your. I cut him off, nodding. Yeah, I want you to have it. I wouldn't have been able to stand any comparisons to Sasha. For safekeeping? No way. It was a tribute, part of reverence. But your first gold. It's important, Vitya. I'll get more. Lots more. And besides, you worked harder than anyone to get me here, didn't you? Coach only had weak protests after that, and accepted the medal with a chuckle and a grim smile. He didn't want to encourage it, but he was touched. Good. Sasha wasn't the only one who could show his gratitude, and I was sincere. He put the medal away in his own coat, just like he'd done with Sasha's, and once more left to retrieve my suitcase. Maybe it was a little mean to not even want to show the gold to my aunt and uncle, but they hadn't come to see me skate for years, not even at practice. They were busy people, and I got that. But if anyone deserved my first gold, it was Coach. My aunt and uncle greeted us at the door. Vitya. Finally. Come in, come in. We've just got the caviar out. And the herrings. I shot a pleading glance back at Coach, but he pushed me forward and into the house. As much as I'm sure Coach wanted to save me, he still had other plans, and my relatives had legal claim. Unfortunate. Thanks for bringing him home, Coach Feltzman, they said, waving to him as they dragged me the rest of the way. Did you have fun at your party? Yeah, I said, with one last longing glance back at the closing door. Can I just go to bed? No, silly. You're going to celebrate with us. Okay, but I'm celebrating on the couch, curled up, with a blanket and a pillow. Oh, Vitya,